Dr. McDonald.
Agus táim fear buíoch as an deis leirt an rún tábhachtach seo anóna agus lasú a bhoga san seachtaí hin féin.
McDonald has moved amendment.
This is a very important motion, Ceann Comhairle, before us this evening, and I hope that all members will support it, along with the amendment that I have just moved in the name of Sinn Féin deputies. Earlier this year, last Ceann Comhairle, we marked the 20th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement. It was and is an agreement that, despite the challenges and difficulties which remain as a result of the partition of our country, it's an agreement we can collectively hold up as an illustration that tolerance and inclusivity will ultimately always triumph over division and mistrust. The first line in the Good Friday Agreement reads, "We, the participants in the multi-party negotiations, believe that the agreement we have negotiated offers a truly historic opportunity for a new beginning." That it was. Over the past 20 years, our island has changed beyond recognition. Children born today in Belfast, in Cork, in Derry, in Galway, or here in Dublin are born to a society which is now more prosperous, more open and more tolerant. A society more confident and more outward-looking, a country that I would argue in almost every respect is better. And that's because fear and suspicion gave way to hope, and because we all collectively embraced peace. There have been ups and downs, setbacks and knocks along the way, but the trajectory has been constant. We have moved and we are moving forward. But there is a problem, and that problem is Brexit. Our island's progress and our island's future did not feature as part of the debate surrounding the Brexit referendum, which was held, let's face it, primarily because of a squabble amongst the Tories. Ireland was, at best and as ever, an afterthought in the minds of the English establishment. No thought was given to our peace process, to the Good Friday Agreement, or to the social and cultural fabric of our island, or indeed to our island's shared economy. But those who did vote on this island, citizens in the north, recognised that it did not make sense for one part of Ireland to be inside the European Union and the other outside. And that is why the electorate in the north, from all backgrounds by the way, voted to remain. They did not consent to leave. And this wasn't due to a fawning admiration of the EU, far from it, but was driven by common sense. Many a staunch unionist recognises that all-Ireland trade, commerce, cooperation and movement are vital to our collective economic capacity and progress. Citizens recognise that it makes sense for Ireland in its entirety to be part of the same trading bloc and the same single market. And that is what the people of the North want. That is what the people of the South want. And that is why, since the Brexit referendum result became clear, we in Sinn Féin have been unequivocal in stating that Brexit represents the most serious social, economic and political threat to our island in a generation. Because it threatens to undermine the progress of the past 20 years. It threatens to undermine the new landscape of our island, and it threatens the future of our country. We've been clear in stating that the Irish Government's approach to negotiation had to be guided by an appreciation of the fact that citizens in the North voted to remain, and that must be recognised and respected. We first put the case for a special deal that would take cognizance of the unique circumstances that present themselves here on our island. And that meant ensuring no return to a hard border. It meant ensuring that citizens' rights are explicitly protected and that the Good Friday Agreement is held up in all its parts. Many people have been rightfully acknowledged here this evening, last Ceann Comhairle. I want to particularly recognise and appreciate the work of Michel Barnier and his colleagues. The Barnier deal agreed last week, the one which we vote on today, is not perfect. I can't even describe it as a good one, because the fact is that there is no such thing as a good Brexit. Brexit is bad for our island, whatever the circumstances, or indeed whatever the deal is on the table. I think we need to be clear on that. However, I acknowledge that last week's deal is one that mitigates against some of the worst aspects of Brexit. There are other issues, primarily the issues of citizens' rights, which ought to have been contained in the withdrawal agreement and do not feature. To that end, we have submitted an amendment to this evening's motion. It's added by way of additionality, not to take from the substance of the motion, but to add to it, because we have to ensure that rights are protected. In very practical ways, we must ensure that basic rights, which are now taken for granted, prevail into the future. Ensuring that citizens in the North continue to have access to the European Court of Human Rights and the European Court of Justice. That citizens in the North continue to have access to third-level education across Europe and to the EU health insurance card. Issues pertaining to rights, these rights and more, were raised in some detail with you, Taoiseach and Tánaiste, last week by a delegation of the 4 pro-Remain parties in the North, that is to say Sinn Féin, the SDLP, the Alliance and the Green Party. Our parties actually represent the majority view of citizens in the North. The DUP do not. The DUP got it catastrophically wrong on Brexit. They got it wrong during the referendum debate, and they have been wrong in its aftermath. And they are really wrong now about the draft agreement on the table. And it is disappointing and in fact disturbing that the DUP have sought to take the side of Tory Brexiteers and the likes of UKIP over the needs and aspirations of citizens in the North and across the island. But that is their decision, to be reckless and irresponsible. The truth is that ordinary citizens in the North, whether they're Republican, Nationalist, Unionist, Loyalist or otherwise, recognise that Brexit is not good, and they want a deal that protects their livelihoods and their futures. And Sinn Féin speaks for all communities on this, not narrow interests. We have brought our view to Europe, to you in the Irish Government, to the British Government also, consistently over the past year and a half. When we first articulated a policy of special status for the North, some of the parties here accused us of grandstanding, and you claimed it was unrealistic. It has since become the agreed EU position in negotiations, and I welcome that, and I acknowledge the shift in the government's position. And I believe we have made an impact in that regard. I want to pay tribute to a party colleague, MEP for the North of Ireland, Martina Anderson, who of all of us, I believe, has been extremely active at a European level in pushing all of these bottom line requirements. I made the point here before, Ceann Comhairle, that Brexit isn't a temporary phase. It has consequences that are very real, lasting and enduring. They are for keeps. So to meet that, we need a solution to match, a solution that's lasting, that isn't time-bound or temporary. And that's why I so strenuously put the case here a fortnight ago that a temporary or a transitory backstop is no backstop at all. Temporary protections mean no protection, and what we need are permanent guarantees. So regardless of the machinations at Westminster over the coming weeks, we need that, and there can't be any backsliding from the backstop. It has to be durable, permanent and legally robust. And there must never, ever be a hard border in Ireland again. In fact, we need to move to a point where there is no border at all. And in that regard, I think there is considerable merit in all of us looking at the post-Brexit environment through a new lens. In time, I believe, we will collectively come to the conclusion that the real lasting guarantee that we desire is in fact the unity of our country. It is, I believe, safe to say that there are now many within unionism who are assessing old allegiances. That isn't to say that they aren't British, they are and will always be. But I think the minds of a significant number of people who would traditionally have staunchly opposed any notion of unity have now been challenged to ponder the future. A large number of unionists recognise the benefits of continuing and enhancing all-Ireland cooperation and the breaking down of barriers. So we are on the road to a unity referendum. It's no longer if, but when. We in Sinn Féin, Taoiseach and Taoiseach have made it very clear to Theresa May that in the event of a Brexit crash-out or a no-deal scenario, it will be incumbent on the British Government to put the constitutional future of the North to the people by way of a unity referendum. And I believe the Irish Government should articulate this same position. And it should, in any event, commence a discussion with the European Commission and other institutions to explore their role and support in facilitating an efficient process of reunification. If the people of the North are to be disregarded by London and to have their futures toyed with by a British Government that has no regard for Ireland, then the people of the North should have their say. This is a reasonable position, which I believe all parties here in the Dáil could support. The European Council on the 29th of April 2017 agreed that in the event of national reunification, the whole of our island will automatically be afforded membership of the European Union. That is right, proper and welcome. So all options have to be on the table as we shape the future. And there are also big issues to consider, because Britain leaving the EU presents new challenges, but also a new opportunity. An opportunity to reassess our entire approach to Europe, and this will be important work. And let's face it and be honest, the British didn't leave for no reason. And whilst the Brexit debate centred in the main on immigration and became marred by racism, xenophobia and Islamophobia, there are serious things to consider. Hundreds of millions of citizens are disillusioned with the European Union and believe it has become removed from its citizens. It's not seen by many as a vehicle for cooperation, but it's associated with elites, with power and control. So we need to propose and initiate radical reform. And that's not going to be easy, but it can be done. A social Europe can be built. And by that I mean one which cherishes citizens and which, instead of placing narrow economic interests at its core, puts people front and centre. Ireland's place is in the EU, and the EU needs to change. We need to construct a democratic Europe. We need to ensure that aspects of the current system are reformed. We need to ensure that member states have a greater say in formulating positive policy. And we want a Europe of equals, of partnership and solidarity. We want a Europe in which member states in times of adversity work together in the spirit of internationalist cooperation to tackle the problems we face collectively. We want a union that works together to build opportunity and prosperity. We want a union that when a member state faces economic difficulties, or when hundreds of thousands of displaced people look for assistance of a prosperous and peaceful region of the world, that we can respond. Europe can play a role as a catalyst for cooperation and progress on all of the big issues that affect us: trade, climate change, human rights, regulation, migration and immigration. And the debate about the future of Europe currently underway notably doesn't focus on these issues. In a time of political flux following Brexit, there's a danger that the simplistic narrative being peddled by some that a more federal Europe will cure the ills of the EU will prevail. That is in spite of most recent studies that show a majority of citizens in Europe don't support the transfer of further powers to Brussels. They don't want more Europe, they want better Europe. So I think the EU needs to begin listening to citizens, to move away from a bureaucratic model intended for the benefit of a few and towards a social Europe which reflects the interests of the many. And that's the only way to address the imbalance of power that we currently have. What's on offer, as I've said, Ceann Comhairle, is not perfect, but it is reasonable. It's the least worst option, if you like, this withdrawal agreement, given the cards which have been dealt. And we will be supporting it, because there is an onus on political leaders to do what is right to defend our country's political and economic interests. That is what has guided us in Sinn Féin. We've supported the Government and the European negotiating team in their endeavours and their attempt to get the best deal possible. We want that as the final outcome, and that should be the position of everybody on this island. We want to avert the imposition of a hard border. We want to ensure the protection of citizens' rights. And crucially, and I go back to my opening remarks, Ceann Comhairle, we want to ensure that the hard-won gains and progress of the past 20 years aren't squandered but are built on. And we can do that with this deal, but more importantly with a lot of hard work we can deliver. So I would urge support for the motion before the Dáil this evening, Ceann Comhairle, and in addition urge support for the Sinn Féin amendment.
David.